Welcome back. It's been a week of drama and revelations at the Zondo Commission interstate capture. Former Minister Nomvula Mokonyane gave evidence in response to claims of the former Bosasa COO, Angelo Agrizzi, after initially denying that she had a party at a guest house in Krugersdorp. She said she then remembered she had her 40th birthday party there, but it was a surprise and she didn't know who paid for it. Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was sceptical also about her claims that food and drink donated by Bosasa, including fine liquor, was donated to the poor. Then the former chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services in Parliament, Vincent Smith, testified about a 600,000 rand payment from Agrizzi. He called it a loan. At the same time, the Auditor General this week said that weak controls and the rapid procurement of PPE in the light of COVID-19 recently created fertile ground for corruption. Let's wrap this all up. An incredible week to discuss. We're joined by Professor Ivor Sarakinsky from the Wits School of Governance. Professor, thank you for being with us. Firstly, let's start with Nomvula Mokonyane. Let's take it person by person. Your overall impression of her testimony.
Well, it would be lovely to lead a life where cars, food, parties arrive and you never have to ask a question or you never have to know who's behind it, who's paying, what the responsibility is, or even the motive for it. You just go through life enjoying the benefits of all of that. So the explanation appears to be implausible.
So it is hard to prove corruption and bribery. You know, people usually don't write what they're going to do. So in that case, ignorance is bliss. I mean, if you just deny, does that mean prosecutors will have very little to work with at the end? Or is there enough in the contradictions, things like that?
It's very hard, as you say, to prove a case of corruption because you have to prove intent. And that's exactly what these denials are about, is to make it as difficult as possible to prove intent. But what prosecutors can do is that they can create a trail of plausible evidence to draw inferences that the relationships were not pure and sound, and that there were motives, and one can provide circumstantial evidence to demonstrate that. So that's one route. The other route is the declarations. Were these parties, were these receipts declared? And you could even find technicalities in terms of parliamentary rules or government rules and income tax rules to say that these are unclaimed benefits and therefore tax should have been paid. Yeah. So there are a range of possibilities that prosecutors could pursue.
Like you say, South Africans are talking about this fundamental fact that there are high-earning people in power, even if it's not bribery or corruption, if it cannot be proved. They're taking the free ride. They're letting everybody around them pay for everything. Is that in itself a problem?
It's a massive problem, because if you've got people, in this case a minister, who held two very important portfolios, if you've got people around that person taking care of their lifestyles, that means that obligations must be created. And the issue is, were those obligations met in various ways in terms of influencing public decisions and allocating public resources? And that's what it comes down to.
Then let's look at Vincent Smith. So he comes on and he says that he didn't declare a loan from Angelo Agrizzi, and these declarations are important as well. He says at the time it was because he didn't know it was from Bosasa. He thought it was a loan from Agrizzi personally. Your assessment of that?
Again, very problematic. And the reason for that is that Vincent Smith was on the Correctional Services Portfolio Committee, and he was also on SCOPA, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Now, those are two very important committees directly linked to the oversight of departments that were giving Bosasa contracts. So the fact that he's at least acknowledging that he got money from Agrizzi, who's clearly an agent of Gavin Watson and Bosasa, is revealing, and there seems to be a stronger case in terms of joining the dots, to use the expression.
And again, I mean, does this make it difficult, though, to prosecute? There are lots of these vague loan agreements going around in South Africa. That's been the case for a while. So if you call it a loan and, oh, yes, I was going to pay it back, it's hard to pin down that was a gift or remuneration for a favour. And let's be clear that the favours often disperse taxpayers' money.
Yes, and this is where a lot of these issues have been heard in the courts, and the courts and the prosecutors have strong grounds here, because if it's a loan, it's got to be paid back, and if it's a loan, there's got to be interest. That's what a loan contract is. And if the recipients of this money can't specify the terms of the loan, then it creates enormous suspicion. And that's the line of questioning that Judge Zondo pursued when he asked, what was the interest rate? And then the response was, I can't answer that. I've been advised by my lawyer not to say anything. And that's exactly the point. What we're talking about is this horrible thing called a non-repayable loan. And that is just open to abuse.
Yeah. And then going back to Nomvula Mokonyane, I mean, what does the Commission do with food and drink that she says was then passed on to the poor, including fine whiskies? What does the Commission do with something like that?
Well, it's clearly contradictory, and it just doesn't make sense. So that's just one side of it. The other side is the Aston Martin, a 3 million rand car with the deposit donated by a friend who had business relations allegedly with the former minister's husband. And that's where there is a strong case, because it clearly shows suggestions of collusion, but at the same time no declaration of income in terms of that paying for the deposit. So at a technical level, there can be some accountability there, despite the obfuscation.
Yeah. So, Professor, you're using words like problematic, and yes, the testimony is problematic, and we can't declare guilt or not in any sense yet. But do you think there is enough, and you can talk about other testimony before the Zondo Commission, to lead to charges down the line? That's what people want. Otherwise, this is an exercise in futility, and maybe some are even concerned other state officials will look and say, okay, these are some of the lines I can use if I want to get away with things.
Yes, and this is where the issue starts to move from revelations to prosecution. And to have the prosecution, you need technical evidence. You need forensic audits. And this is exactly what the Hawks and the NPA and other agencies are supposed to be doing, is to go through the chase the money in great detail. And once one has all the money lined up, then it becomes much easier to draw the inferences to strengthen the case. So my suspicion is that we're just seeing snippets, big soundbite snippets of what's coming out, whereas behind the scenes, when one is chasing the money and doing the paper chase to tie things up in terms of where the money went and how it arrived by looking at bank statements and invoices and receipts, then I think after many hours of hard work, patterns might emerge that will be plausible in a court of law.
Yeah, and we wait as a country to see what happens. The Auditor General then comes into this and says there was a lack of control, a very quick procurement of PPE, for example, because of COVID-19, and that was a fertile ground for corruption. It sounds like something of a feeding frenzy if you look at the news and you look at his report, but that means there was a problem beforehand. Do you agree? A sort of a mass of people ready, knowing how the system works, knowing the weaknesses, and waiting for the gaps.
Absolutely. And none of us were surprised when the scandals broke. And all one has to do is look at Auditor General's reports at municipal, provincial and national level over a number of years, and you see exactly the same points being made repeatedly with no action in terms of enforcing and tightening supply chain management. So yes, you've seen people positioning themselves in advance of tenders in other contexts, and as soon as the announcement was made that money was coming for PPE, those same people applied the tactics and they just speeded up their timelines, and they were ready to go when the money started flowing, at the expense of the healthcare workers who needed those resources the most, and citizens who were ill and needed hospital care. Yeah. And that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah, and at least looking forward, the Auditor General has said these controls can be put in place to prevent this from happening in future. Thank you for your analysis, Professor Ivor Sarakinsky from the Wits School of Governance. Let's take a look at your weather. More to come on The Full View. Stay with us.